Subaru Natsuki met Lady Crusch Karsten at her capital villa to secure an alliance between Amelia's camp and Crusch's camp, and he chose the white whale as his strongest bargaining chip to change cautious wait-and-see talks into a decisive plan. In the reception room, Rem stood quietly by Subaru's side while Crusch, Ferris, Wilhelm, and the merchant Russell fellow listened, as Subaru declared he knew when and where the white whale, a flying demon beast of mist, and one of the world's three great demon beasts would appear next. Wilhelm's long-buried rage briefly filled the room at the name of the whale that took his wife, and he apologized with composed restraint, showing both his discipline and how deep the wound in his heart truly ran. When Russell pressed for proof, Subaru produced a strange media from his homeland, a flipped cell phone, and explained that it gave a reliable signal for the whale's timing, which Russell examined with fascination even though he could not read its glowing foreign numbers. Subaru carefully avoided lies, while Rem supported him by recalling the earlier demon beast incident in Roswell's lands that he seemed to detect first, and Crusch revealed her blessing of wind reading, which let her sense deception and find none in Rem's words. This earned Subaru a minimal but crucial plank of trust. They would consider that his media could warn them about an extraordinary demon beast threat, even if they did not yet fully accept the claim. Anastasia Hoshin, a rival royal candidate and skilled merchant, then entered at Subaru's prior invitation, raising the stakes. Her presence signaled that the discussion affected commerce, logistics, and political reputation far beyond one house. Russell questioned Subaru's motive for inviting a competitor, suspecting a bidding game, and Crusch rejected any hint of an auction, while Anastasia smiled that being present gave weight to big opportunities, which forced Subaru to state his real aim plainly. Subaru argued he was not playing rivals against each other. Instead, he deduced from late-night visitors, spiking metal goods prices, and quiet mustering that Crusch was already preparing a punitive force, and that her plan pointed to a white whale hunt meant to help people and to win over merchants who still doubted her leadership. He proposed a straight exchange. The Amelia camp would offer magic crystal mining rights in the Great Elior Forest and give the whale's timing and location, and Crusch would ally for a joint hunt that could shift public fear into hope. Subaru finally named a tight window, about 30 hours, and a place, the area around the great flugel tree on the leafless plains, which Wilhelm confirmed lined up with patterns he had painstakingly researched over 14 years. With Russell promising the guild's fast procurement and Anastasia pledging Hoshin company support, Crusch grasped Subaru's hand and agreed to trust his eyes and spirit for this moment, while Wilhelm knelt to thank Subaru for granting him a chance to take vengeance for Theresia van Austria, the wife he loved and lost. Crusch immediately set a sober, practical tone, reminding everyone that trust demanded responsibility, that lives were at stake, and that they must move with speed and order if 30 hours was their limit. Russell and Anastasia accepted the urgency, each stating how their networks would fill gear and supply gaps without attracting attention, since a noisy buildup would cause panic or sabotage. Subaru, Rem, and Wilhelm aligned their roles in spirit even before formal assignments were given. Subaru would push stubbornly, act visibly, and keep momentum. Rem would fight as a precise, mobile striker, and Wilhelm would lead by example against the foe he had studied and hated for years. Crusch acknowledged the tightrope they would walk, reaffirming that decisions affecting the kingdom and the royal selection could not be taken lightly. But that action against the whale's terror was worth the risk and the cost. The mansion turned into a moving workshop overnight as weapons, armor, crystals, and medical supplies flowed in, with Crusch mustering the punitive force she had prepared, and Russell and Anastasia coordinating wagons, ledgers, runners, and credit so that nothing stalled for lack of materials. Subaru grew uneasy at being idle, while others strained themselves, but Ferris scolded him to stop saying "because of me" and see that their round-the-clock effort was thanks to his push. Because without a trigger, Wilhelm's research and Crusch's plan might not have met a fixed hour. Ferris spoke softly about Crusch's past in the late Fourth Prince, Fourier Lugunica, whose earnest will and kind heart shaped both Ferris and Crusch, and whose memory still guided Crusch to reach out to people burdened by grief. He explained how Wilhelm's evidence had met a kingdom too wounded and leaderless to act, and how Crusch, seeing a man drowning in sorrow, extended her hand, building a path for his vengeful resolve to become a disciplined force. Subaru told Wilhelm that he and Rem would fight beside him, and Wilhelm, holding back shame and pain, shared that Teresa of Anastasia loved flowers and not the sword, that he took the sword from her so she could live as Teresa instead of the sword saint, and that the sword did not forgive her, setting the course for tragedy. Wilhelm said he would find his answer with his own blade in the battle to come and finally go to where his wife rests, a promise that put quiet steel in his gaze and gave the soldiers around him a measure of borrowed courage. At dawn, Ferris issued Subaru an unusual privilege. Pick a combat land dragon from Crusch's stables, even though Subaru knew nothing about choosing mounts. And Rem joked she usually just made any mount submit by will. Subaru's attention fixed on a pitch-black land dragon with calm, sharp eyes, which accepted his touch without prideful resistance, and Rem admitted she feared it might bite him because of its proud breed. Yet it nudged his hand as if recognizing something in him. He chose the black dragon on instinct, later named Patlish in tone and spirit, and Ferris, wearing the white uniform of the Royal Guard instead of his usual dress, teased him not to use love at first sight because it would make Rem pout, which she denied with a flustered promise to get along with it properly. The simple bond mattered. A rider who would stay mounted, even terrified, and a mount that would neither balk nor throw him at the crucial moment, could turn seconds into survival and survival into a well-timed strike. Crusch reviewed the punitive forces formation plan, squads of consistent head counts, clear runners, in the strict use of mana-suppressing and anti-magic crystals to counter the whale's mist, which could erase both bodies and memories, and had ruined entire caravans and villages. She reminded everyone that the mist's true horror was that it stole the dead twice, once from life and then from memory. So they would count and recount, never losing track of who was where, as squads spread to avoid sudden erasure. Ferris managed triage placement and crystal cannon timing at the rear lines, while Ricardo's Iron Fang took flexible flanks for interrupting strikes, and Mimi and Hetero of the Cat Tribe prepared synchronized spell work in emergency extractions. Subaru watched the flurry of efficient movement and realized that, in his past loops, this same readiness had existed out of his view, and that his push only fixed the timing into an hour that Wilhelm's calculations had long suggested. The force reached the leafless plains near the great flugel tree within the 30-hour window, and the sky's gray light and sifting mist made everyone tighten reins and check gear twice, because this was the whale's home advantage. Crusch made the head count discipline explicit. Squads would call numbers in cycles, and runners would note every change, because the whale's mist could erase people and their place in memory, leaving even friends unable to recall a lost face. The first contact arrived as a low, grating chorus like knives on glass, and the whale's huge, fish-like shadow swam in the air, laying down mist that turned lines into blurs. So Ferris ordered anti-magic shots to cut through mana and open sightlines. Crusch raised her sword and spoke of graves without bodies, of travelers who vanished into fog, and of the duty to fight for those who could not be remembered. And that steady voice pulled the troops' eyes forward and stopped a few knees from buckling. Wilhelm surged at the opening with blade drawn, moving like a man who had waited 14 years for this moment, and his first exchanges proved the hide could be cut and that the foe bled when struck with timing and force. Ricardo and the Iron Fang coordinated flanks so that strikes landed in sequences rather than in wasteful overlap. And Ferris warned that anti-magic crystal stocks were limited and must be fired only when mist density peaked to buy the biggest windows. The early rhythm seemed to hold. Thin the mist, see, strike, withdraw, count heads, repeat, adjusting positions with Crusch's hand as nerves steadied under a leader who did not shout, yet did not flinch. Then disaster broke the cadence when two more white whales appeared, one behind, one above, and the terrible triple chorus rolled over the field like a living weight, causing knights to drop swords and fall to their knees. The force instantly understood what it meant. Even one whale consumed expeditions. 3 meant impossibility, and the mind used that word to escape pain, which is how battles end. Subaru, thrown by a sudden shove that saved him from a strike, realized Ricardo had just traded his life's blood to shield him as the whale's tail carved the ground, and his own thoughts swayed as if to sink. He looked at Rem, shaken but upright, lips blue, eyes trembling, and decided that despair did not suit her, that a smile did, and he drove out the inner whisper telling him to surrender. He stood, bared his teeth, and climbed Patlish with clumsy hands, shouting that nothing was over, and that this was not enough despair to stop him. And Rem answered with steel by smashing the whale's nose and pinning it with ice blades to draw blood. The shock of audible pain from the beast reminded men that it could be hurt, and some heads rose, some hands closed fingers again around hilts. Because movement from one person can shake a stalled line. In that heartbeat, Subaru decided that fear grew when men stood still, and that he could be bait if bait meant a controlled target for allies to hit behind. Subaru formed a quick, simple plan that matched the limits of their tools and morale. Divide the foe's attention, commit to one target, and use anti-magic shots as drums to set the rhythm for strikes, while squads stayed spread and counted in cycles. He judged that the three whales were not three separate beings of equal strength, but splits of one, with offshoots weaker than the original. So crushing one should break the trick and the mind-crushing illusion of impossible. Crusch accepted that logic in a glance and ordered timing brackets for the next anti-magic volleys, with Ricardo's absence forcing Iron Fang lieutenants to step into a rotating flank roll while Mimi and Hetero prepared synchronized howls to twist the whale's body at Subaru's mark. Subaru took the visible bait job on Patlash, riding loud and direct to pull a whale down to ground level where spikes, ice, and blades could reach, telling Rem to hold nothing back on openings, even if it meant overextending him for a moment. The army adopted a breathing pattern. Mist thickens, anti-magic shots thin it. Bait draws the whale low or sideways. Rem and frontliners smash exposed points, squads hold distance and call head counts. And then everyone resets before mist closes again. That loop burned stamina, crystals, and focus, but it also cut deep and caused visible staggers, which broke the eerie calm the beast tried to impose from above. Subaru yelled only short orders. Save him, hit there, pull back, count now, because simple words travel in fear better than clever plans, and more men moved when the words were easy. Casualties continued, including erasures and mists that tore holes in squads' memories. Yet Crusch kept units from bunching. Ferris conserved shots, and the field bent toward the most damaged whale like a ring squeezing shut. Mimi and Hetero executed a joint sonic strike on Subaru's call, twisting the whale's frame and cracking hardened hide, and then the beast's belly erupted with blood, and a figure tumbled with the flood. Wilhelm, alive, mangled, and refusing to die. Subaru and the twins dragged him clear, while Mimi applied simple healing, and Subaru insisted on sending Wilhelm back to Ferris, rather than letting the old man fight to death in the mud, because losing reason is how vengeance wins, but wars are lost. Hetero agreed to run the extraction if there was a real chance to win. Subaru said there was, and sprinted back to Rem and Crusch to keep pressure on the same target. Subaru stated the split hypothesis out loud. The main body had created offshoots at a stamina cost, so destroying one should unravel the trick and the despair it created, and Crusch accepted the wager with a steady expression. The army committed to one whale, bleeding and grounded, and refused to let it climb or vanish into mist, funneling everything into short bursts whose timing the crystals dictated. In doing so, the force turned limited gear into a method, took fear's vague shape and gave it rules, and soldiers regained what they most needed: predictable steps to follow under a leader's eye. As the targeted whale staggered and flailed, Wilhelm returned to the field in spirit, if not yet in body, through the discipline he had taught. Men moving in lines, timing with shots, cutting where it counts. And then, despite his wounds, he rose and pushed himself back to the front, as if the path there was the only one left to walk. He moved like the sword devil people whispered about, leaping, sliding, carving, his blade writing an answer in red on the hide that had mocked him for years. Each strike sounding like a conversation with Teresia. Subaru and Rem created openings with blunt force and ice pins, while squads anchored gaps so the other two whales could not crash the ring before the grounded one was finished. and Ferris released anti-magic shots at the last possible second to keep sight from collapsing. Bit by bit, speed bled from the whale's movements, and then Wilhelm cut where lift lived, tearing through what still let the beast rise, and the monster crashed down to the grass as a trembling, screaming bulk. The final blows came clean and merciless, and when Wilhelm's sword ended the whale's life, his shoulders shook not from weakness, but from a promise finally kept to the woman who loved flowers and not the sword. The field felt it like a change in weather. Men who had accepted death lifted their heads and shouted, not because they were safe, but because the impossible had been made breakable by resolve, timing, and shared purpose. Even with other threats circling, the proof of one whale's death mattered more than math, because fear's logic had rested on 3, and now a sword had cut that number apart and shown that numbers can lie when the mind is cornered. Crusch held formation tight, Ferris guarded wounded roots, and Mimi and Hataro kept their ligers and magic ready to interrupt any charge from above, buying space for the line to reset around the new fact on the ground. In that proof, Subaru's trust chain, Crusch's command, Ferris's restraint, Rem's ferocity, Merchant's logistics, and Wilhelm's blade, held exactly where it most needed to hold. The punitive force harvested what they could from the fallen whale for evidence and morale, and wagons took trophies and remains to show the capital that terror was not immortal, even if memory wounds would linger among those erased in the living who felt those gaps. Men counted again, and the numbers were different, but the line did not break anymore, because the eye saw a headless myth, and the ear heard soldiers call to each other by name. The mist, thinner now under measured fire, seemed less like a curse and more like weather that people could plan around, which is how terror ends. Not with one cheer, but with tasks that feel ordinary again. With the main objective achieved and the white whale slain in a costful but clear victory, the Allied force regrouped, triaged, and rearmed to march toward the Mather's domain, where the witch cult threat was the reason Subaru had sought help in the first place. Crusch kept her grip on command steady and practical, while Russell and Anastasia ensured supply lines kept moving, because a force that stops moving turns a win into a pause that enemies can exploit. Subaru, having done what he promised, help hunt the whale and stand with Wilhelm, fixed his gaze on Roswell's territory, where a different kind of terror waited that did not fly or sing, but whispered and tore people apart from the inside. Rem stayed close, ready and unafraid, her iron ball and magic as steady as her faith. And Patlash, the black land dragon that had trusted Subaru at first touch, carried him onward in a posture that was still clumsy, but no longer uncertain. Crusch and Subaru kept their alliance plain and clear. She would lead with order and courage, and he would speak loud when silence tried to spread. So the army moved as one toward the next fight. Volume 7 closes with movement and purpose. The white whale's long terror has been cut down by cost and courage, and the Allied march continues toward the witch cult in the Mather's domain, where another decisive confrontation awaits, and where the question shifts from how to fight a monster in the sky to how to stop fanatics on the ground. Further detail from the negotiation shows how each person's role locked the plan into place at speed once the 30-hour window and Flugeltree location were stated aloud. Russell's guild runners began pulling gear from every corner of the capital with letters of credit and promises of payment after victory, while Anastasia's Hoshin company used non-guild channels to fill gaps with quiet efficiency. Ferris, switching from teasing to crisp orders, marked off medical tents and return routes for the wounded, and he quietly prepared for the worst by setting rules for who could be saved on the field and who had to be moved, because a medic's job in a battle like this was triage, not miracles. Rem's support in the negotiation mattered more than she realized, because Crusch's wind reading saw no deceit in her, turning Subaru's careful half-truths about the media into enough credibility to move men and money without delay. Subaru understood that a long explanation would not convince anyone. Only a timed, verifiable event would, which is why naming 30 hours in Flugeltree committed him and everyone else to action that would either prove him a fool or a man with a useful card. Wilhelm's quiet acceptance of that risk, the risk of acting on someone else's clock after years of his own, said more to the assembled warriors than any speech could. On the eve of battle, Ferris's story about Prince Fourier worked on Subaru in a simple way. It turned his shame into duty and his fear into something that could be managed by doing the next right thing. That is why when the triple whale illusion crushed morale, Subaru's first move was not a clever tactic, but to stand up and shout, because fear breaks in the sound of a human voice that refuses to obey it. Rem's immediate violence, steel on bone, ice in flesh, made a sound any soldier knows, the sound of a wound that proves the enemy can bleed. The anti-magic crystals served as more than tools. They gave the army a heartbeat, and every time the mist thinned, that heartbeat said, "Now," which is how men move together, even while afraid. Crusch used those beats to pull the line into shape, and Ferris saved shots until they would save lives, which is how scarce tools become enough. Mimi and Hitaro's synchronized howls showed another truth. Small units that trust each other can do work no one expects, especially when they strike at a precise second instead of whenever they feel like it. When Wilhelm stepped back into the fight after being cut from a monster's belly, the field quieted for a moment inside men's heads, because the picture in front of them did not match the story Terror had been telling. Then his blade spoke with the only voice that mattered to him, one that could be heard in a garden full of flowers. And the work that could not be done by sorrow alone became possible in timing and steel. The whale died, and with it the lie that they could not change anything, and while grief for the erased remained like missing steps on a staircase, people kept climbing anyway. The march to the Mather's domain did not feel like a victory parade. It felt like leaving one hard job to meet another, which is often how real victories look when they matter. Crusch's banner did not promise safety. It promised order and courage again tomorrow, and that was enough for soldiers to walk behind it with eyes forward. Subaru kept his promise to Rem and Amelia, the only way promises can be kept in a hard world, by doing the next thing that has to be done, one step, one order, one strike at a time.